The Oval Office was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. President Donald Trump sat at his desk, his attention divided between a stack of policy briefs and the muted television playing news coverage in the background. The weight of the presidency was heavy, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. A soft knock interrupted the silence. "Mr. President," a voice called from the doorway. It was Sarah, his chief of staff, her face unusually solemn. She held a tablet in her hands, her grip tight as if she were carrying something fragile. Trump looked up, his brow furrowing. "What is it, Sarah? Unless it's about the economy or the border, it can wait." "It's not about the economy, sir," Sarah replied, stepping into the room. "It's about a little girl who thinks you're her hero." That caught his attention. Trump leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes narrowing with curiosity. "A hero, huh? Let's see it." Sarah placed the tablet on his desk and pressed play. The screen lit up, revealing a young girl lying in a hospital bed. She was pale, her head wrapped in a bright red scarf adorned with tiny American flags. Despite her frailty, her voice was steady, her eyes filled with a determination that belied her age. "Hi, Mr. President," the girl began, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Emily, and I'm 8 years old. I have cancer, and the doctors say I might not get better. But that's okay. I just have one wish. I want you to save the other kids like me. They're suffering too, and I know you can help them. You're the president, and you can do anything." The video ended, leaving the room in silence. Trump stared at the frozen image of Emily's bright smile, her words echoing in his mind. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the desk. "Is this real?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Her mother sent it through a charity foundation. Emily has terminal cancer. She doesn't have much time." For a moment, Trump sat motionless, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Finally, he said, "How soon can we make this happen?" The car ride to the hospital was silent, but Trump's mind was anything but. His motorcade navigated the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., but the real journey was happening in his thoughts. He stared out the window, replaying Emily's video in his mind. Her voice, her unwavering hope, had pierced something deep inside him. He had been called many things in his life: a businessman, a reality TV star, a president, but never a hero in the way Emily saw him. Her faith in him was both humbling and terrifying. As the car pulled up to the hospital, Sarah, sitting beside him, broke the silence. "You don't have to do this, sir," she said softly. "You're already her hero, even if you stayed in the Oval Office. Emily would still think of you that way." Trump didn't respond immediately. He stepped out of the car, the brisk evening air stinging his face. At the entrance of the hospital, he finally turned to her. "She deserves more than just an image of me," he said. "She deserves something real." Inside the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. A nurse led them through the quiet halls toward the pediatric oncology ward. The door to Emily's room was decorated with hand-drawn pictures, stars, American flags, and a particularly wobbly but charming sketch of the White House. A small nameplate read, "Emily's Dream Room." Trump hesitated at the door. Sarah touched his arm. "She's been waiting for this moment," she said gently. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was small but vibrant. The walls were covered with posters of astronauts, American landmarks, and a large map of the United States. On the bedside table was a notebook labeled "My Plan to Save America's Kids," its pages filled with scribbles and sketches. In the middle of it all was Emily. She was sitting up in bed, her frail frame propped up by pillows. Her head was wrapped in her signature red scarf, and her face lit up the moment she saw him. "Mr. President," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with awe. Trump knelt by her bedside, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You must be Emily," he said gently. "I've heard you're quite the visionary." Emily giggled, the sound weak but pure. "I have a plan," she said, pointing to her notebook. "It's about saving kids like me. Will you help me?" Trump chuckled softly. "I think you've got a better plan than most of my advisors. Let's hear it." For the next hour, Emily walked him through her notebook. She had detailed ideas for funding cancer research, building better hospitals for kids, and even a national campaign to raise awareness. Her passion was infectious, and Trump found himself captivated by her determination. "You've thought of everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You'd make a great president someday." Emily beamed, her cheeks flushing faintly. Do you think we can really save the kids? Trump met her gaze, his eyes softening. I think we can, and I'll make sure your plan is part of it. As their conversation continued, Emily's mother appeared in the doorway. Her face was a mixture of relief and exhaustion, her hands trembling slightly. Thank you for coming, she said softly. You've made her so happy. Trump stood, walking over to her. She's an extraordinary girl, he said. I'm the one who's lucky to meet her. Emily's mother smiled through her tears. She wrote something for you, she said, holding out a small envelope. She wanted you to have it. Trump took the envelope, feeling the weight of it even before he opened it. As he slid the letter into his pocket, he knew this moment would stay with him forever. Back at the White House, Trump sat at the resolute desk, the envelope still unopened in his hand. He had received countless letters during his presidency, some praising him, others criticizing him, but this one felt different. He knew it would be different. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated the room as he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky but clear, every word carefully chosen. Dear Mr. President, thank you for making my dream come true. Meeting you was the best day of my life. When you save the kids, please remember me. Even if I can't be there, I want to be part of the change. Love, Emily. Trump stared at the letter for a long time, his chest tight. For all his accomplishments, all the deals he had brokered, and battles he had won, this simple note carried more weight than anything he had ever achieved. The next morning, Trump returned to the hospital. The bright energy that had filled Emily's room the day before was noticeably dimmer. She smiled when she saw him, but it was weaker, her cheeks pale. Trump sat by her bed, careful not to show the worry he felt. You've got quite a fan club, he said, holding up the notebook she had given him. I had to fight Sarah to keep this. Emily laughed softly, the sound more like a whisper. It's my plan, she said. Every president needs one. He nodded seriously. It's the best plan I've ever seen. Emily shifted slightly, her small hands clutching the blanket. Her voice was hesitant when she asked, Mr. President, why do you want to save the kids? The question caught him off guard. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because they're the future, he said finally. And if we don't fight for them, who will? Emily's gaze didn't waver. It's about dreaming big, isn't it? Trump smiled faintly. Something like that. I like that, she said, her voice thoughtful. I think big dreams are important. She paused, her small hands fiddling with the edge of the blanket. Mr. President, can I ask you something else? Anything, he said. Emily hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his. When you save the kids, will you take me with you? The room seemed to freeze. Trump felt the weight of her question settle over him, heavier than any decision he had ever made. He leaned closer, his voice steady. I promise, Emily, he said softly, you'll be with us every step of the way. Her smile returned, faint but radiant. Really? Really, he said firmly. You'll always be part of the change. As she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, Trump realized this wasn't just a promise, it was a mission he couldn't fail. The next morning, the hospital was quieter than usual. Trump noticed the difference immediately as he stepped into the pediatric ward. The hum of machines was softer, the voices of nurses subdued. Emily's mother met him at the door of her room, her eyes red but her expression resolute. She's been asking for you, she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, Emily was propped up on her pillows, her red scarf slightly askew. She looked smaller today, her face pale, but her smile as bright as ever. Hi, Mr. President, she whispered. Trump sat beside her, taking her small hand in his. Hi, Commander Emily, he said, forcing a smile. How's the plan coming along? She giggled faintly. It's almost ready for action, she said, her voice soft but proud. But I wanted to give you something first. Emily's mother handed her a small piece of paper, folded neatly into a star. Emily held it out to Trump with trembling hands. This is for you, she said, so you can take it with you when you save the kids. Trump took the star carefully, feeling its delicate weight in his hands. The edges were uneven, the folds imperfect, but it was the most precious thing he had ever held. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. I'll make sure this reaches every kid in America. Emily's eyes sparkled. You promise? I promise, Trump said firmly. This star will shine brighter than any other. For a moment, they sat in silence, the hum of machines filling the room. Then Emily looked at him, her expression serious. "Mr. President," she said softly, "I don't think I'll be here much longer." Trump's throat tightened. "You'll always be here, Emily," he said. "Every time I look at this star, I'll see you." Her smile returned, faint but radiant. "Do you think people will remember me?" "Of course they will," Trump said. "You're going to be part of something so big, so extraordinary, that people will talk about you for generations. You've already made history." Emily's eyes closed briefly, her breath shallow. When she opened them again, she whispered, "I'll watch from the stars." Trump stayed with her until she drifted off to sleep, her hand still clutching his. When her mother re-entered the room, her face streaked with tears, Trump stood, placing the folded star in his pocket. As he left the room, he knew Emily's star wasn't just a symbol. It was a promise that he would carry with him to the ends of the earth. The next morning, Sarah received the call. Trump was sitting in the Oval Office, staring out at the horizon as the sun rose. He had slept only a few hours, the folded paper star sitting on his desk beside the letter. Sarah's voice was soft as she stepped in. "She passed early this morning." The words struck like a blow. Trump didn't move at first, his gaze fixed on the skyline. For a man who prided himself on solving impossible problems, on fixing the unfixable, this was a truth he could not change. He exhaled slowly, standing and slipping the star into his pocket. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. Later that day, he returned to the hospital to see Emily's mother. She was sitting in the same chair where she had waited so many times before, her face lined with grief, but also a quiet resolve. "She talked about you until the very end," she said. "She said you gave her everything she ever dreamed of." Trump reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded star. "She gave me this," he said softly, "and I made her a promise." Emily's mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She believed in you. She always said you could do anything." Trump placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort from a man who so often hid his emotions. "She'll always be a part of everything I do." In the weeks that followed, Trump worked tirelessly, his focus sharper than it had been in years. He launched a national initiative called Emily's Star, a comprehensive plan to fund cancer research, improve pediatric health care, and support families affected by the disease. The folded star Emily had given him was encased in glass and placed in the Oval Office, a constant reminder of the promise he had made. At the unveiling of the initiative, Trump stood before a crowd of reporters, lawmakers, and families. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion as he spoke. "This isn't just about politics or policy," he said. "This is about a little girl named Emily who dreamed of saving America's kids. She believed in me, and now it's my job to believe in her dream. Together, we'll make sure no child has to suffer like she did." The room erupted in applause, but Trump's gaze was fixed on the star in the glass case. For the first time in his presidency, he felt the weight of something greater than himself. Years later, as Trump stood in the Rose Garden, watching children play under the warm sun, he thought of Emily. Her star still shone brightly in the Oval Office, a symbol of hope and resilience. He had kept his promise. Pediatric cancer rates had dropped, new treatments had been developed, and families across the country had found hope in Emily's story. As he looked up at the sky, he whispered, "We did it, Emily. We saved the kids." And somewhere, far beyond the reach of Earth, Emily's star shone brighter than ever.